Welcome to Spidell's California Minute. I'm your host, Catherine Zidane, and today we're covering mandatory e-pay, including penalties and waiver requests and pass-through entity elective tax payments. If you're looking for an update covering all the tax news and changes that occurred during tax season, plus preparation for handling extensions, sign up for Spidell's post-tax season update and review webinar. Live sessions start on May 10th, and you can get registered and see a full list of topics covered at caltax.com under the Webinars tab. We've received some recent questions via our message board about the mandatory e-pay rules and how and when the requirement applies. An individual or corporation that makes any single estimated tax or extension payment of more than $20,000 or has a total tax liability in excess of $80,000 is required to make all future payments by electronic funds transfer, although the triggering payment itself does not need to be made electronically. But one important thing to remember is that even if the FTB has not notified the taxpayer about this requirement, once the estimate or extension payment is made or the return showing the tax liability is filed, all future payments are required to be made electronically. Individual taxpayers can pay via WebPay, electronic funds withdrawal, credit card, or the pay by phone option. Businesses can make many of their electronic funds transfer payments by using the FTB's WebPay for Businesses or by credit card. If a business taxpayer is required to remit payments electronically but sends a payment by other means like check or cash, the penalty is 10% of the amount not paid electronically. For individuals, the penalty is 1% of the amount paid. The penalties apply unless the failure to pay electronically was for reasonable cause and not willful neglect. Being unaware of the mandatory e-pay requirement or arguing that it's the taxpayer's first failure does not establish reasonable cause. The penalty applies even if the payment is less than $20,000, but the taxpayer was otherwise required to pay electronically. Taxpayers can request a waiver of the mandatory e-pay requirement, which the FTB may grant if they determine that the amounts paid in excess of the threshold amounts were not representative of the taxpayer's tax liability. A waiver also may be granted if the taxpayer did not meet either the $20,000 or the $80,000 threshold amount for the prior year. Individuals can request a waiver by submitting Form FTB 4107, Mandatory e-pay Program Election to Discontinue or Waiver Request, and businesses should submit Form FTB 3816, Electronic Funds Transfer Election to Discontinue or Waiver Request. Many S corporations have been receiving e-pay penalty notices for failing to make their pass-through entity elective tax payments electronically. But these penalties were not caused by pass-through entity tax payments triggering the mandatory e-pay requirement. The penalties applied to S corporations that were subject to the mandatory e-pay requirement prior to making their pass-through entity tax payments, but made these payments with a check using Form FTB 3893, Pass-through entity elective tax payment voucher. And just as a note, partnerships are not subject to the e-pay mandate. Spidell asked the FTB to provide automatic relief from these penalties. The FTB stated that they won't provide automatic penalty relief, but they will offer penalty relief on a case-by-case basis for the e-pay penalties. Taxpayers should request penalty abatement and explain the reasonable cause basis for the relief. We recommend noting the recent issues with the FTB's WebPay system and citing the FTB's December 17th tax news flash, which recommended that taxpayers having difficulty using WebPay mail in a payment. We also cover mandatory e-pay requirements in Spidell's analysis and explanation of California taxes reference manual, which is available in print and online versions and is updated quarterly to reflect new law and guidance. You can find more details at caltax.com under the Publications tab. That's all for this week. Join us next time for another episode of Spidell's California Minute.